Hey friend, it's Duc. In this training, I would love to share with you how to create Apple iTunes Store search app. So the app looks like this. We have simple UI design with a table view of the apps. And then we have a search bar that we can search for the names of the app, of the software, or any song. Actually, you can search anything on the iTunes Store and the App Store, or anything that Apple provides on the internet. And then it will just fetch out the content in real time. Now, the nice thing about this is you'll learn a lot about REST API, about building iOS apps with networking stack, about iOS multi-threading, about how to parse JSON in iOS, how about advanced tail view. All of those things we'll talk about in this training. Now, if any of those things is kind of like overhead for you or overwhelming for you, that's great, because I will explain for you each step of the way. So don't worry. Now, the first step is, as always, I prepare for you a starter project with some resources for you and some just helpful tutorials and some links, some resources for you. So it goes to the link on this page or in the description. Download that resources, just enter your name and email there so I can send you that resources all for free. And also, I would love to give you another thing. That is, I have another training called How to Create Nike E-commerce Retail Store App without losing $50,000 to do it. So I would love to give you that training for free too. If you would love to do that, just click the link on this page and download that training and download all the resources for this episode. So now, go there, download it, and let's move on and create the iTunes Store search app right now. Inside your resource, the course resources that you download, by the way, if you haven't downloaded, please download the resources in the description right now, and you'll find there will be a link for you to click on. So click on this guy and it will open up your browser. Here you'll find out iTunes affiliate resources. Now all this means is that it's pretty much a public API that Apple provides us with some of the APIs. So you see iTunes search API allows us to search iTunes, to search App Store, iBook Store, all of the things, that services that Apple sells online. So you find everything here. Now, there's only one thing you need to know in order to do this and search these things is you will need to provide a fully qualified URL, which is something like this. HTTPS, which is a secure server, which is great. And then we have itunes.apple.com/search ? Parameter key value. So all it means is that you have a base URL, like the root URL is this HTTPS itunes.apple.com/search. So that is the root URL. And then if you scroll down, you read these things, and all it means is you find out that you have to provide some key value pairs, kind of like your dictionary in Swift. But here you have key 1 equals value 1, and then and key 2 equals value 2, and key 3 equals value 3. That is the URL that you have to construct. Now, what are some of the keys? Well, these are some of the keys we have in the table here. We have the term, which is kind of like the search string, right? The sequence of characters, the string that you want to search. So for example, if I want to search Instagram, then the term, it is going to be Instagram. Now, what is even the problem is that if the user search like Michael Jackson, right? If they search like Michael, something like this. If they search Michael Jackson, something like this, right? And you see there is a what is this? There is a space character like this. Now, in a URL, it doesn't allows us to have that character. That's why from that term string, you have to construct a URL encoded text string that looks like this. For example, we have the Jack Johnson, which pretty much we have the plus sign. Now, there's other things that you have to read here, and I will share with you when we code this thing. And then we have like the entity. Entity, it means that do you want to search in the movies, podcast, or music video, or audiobook, or TV show, or software, or ebooks, those kind of things. And then we have the attributes, we have the call back, all of those things limit how many results do you want to have, or language, or version of the thing that you want to search for. Or explicit, do you want to have like no explicit, or yes, do you want both explicit and no explicit? Those are some of the URL that you want to construct, and those are some of the terms. You can find all of these things by reading through this. But now let's go back into our Xcode. What we want to do now is we have to notice that we realized that the base URL is something like itunes.apple.com. Of course, we have the HTTPS before that, and we have search, right? And then after that, we got the term equals to something over here, right? And then another thing, maybe you want to have entity equals like software, right? Now, this is kind of like a basic structure of our app. For example, the user wants to search Instagram in software. Then we have this URL. But what happens if the user wants to search, for example, let's say, how about Malibu, and instead of software, we want to search in music, right? Or if you want to search like Iron plus man here in movie, right? So there's a bunch of things that we have to construct these things, and if we put all of the constructing this URL inside our view controller, that could violate somehow MVC, because these things, it's pretty much is the job of a model class. So why don't we create a new file here in the model, and we'll call this a script file. And for this, I'm going to name this guy App Store Endpoint. It will create for us the endpoint, meaning those URLs in our app. So let's create this guy. And first off, let's have an enum. Okay, I will explain why do we want to use an enum in just a moment. Now, an enum in Swift, it is a full-fledged object, so it will have pretty much all the features in object-oriented programming and plus some others. So enum, we call this guy App Store Endpoint, like this. Now this enum, it has different cases, right? An enum has different cases. So here, I want to have a case that, hey, the user wants to construct an endpoint from the App Store, and that the user wants to search for something. Because if you notice that users can do a lot of things, not only search, but they can do some other things. I really believe that we have like lookups or something. Oh, right. So here, we have instead of search, we have lookup. We have some other things. So iTunes have a lot of things here. So now we have a case of search. Later on, maybe you want to have a case of a lookup or something, right? So here, the case of search, and we want the user who wants to have an endpoint, meaning a URL to search, provide us the term, which is the search key, and then provides us the entity that they want to search. So here is another string. Cool. And then let's have a private variable called base URL, which is a string here, and here we will return a string which is https /itunes.apple.com. Remember this? We have the itunes.apple.com, right? What's next? Now, from this guy, from the base URL, we need to provide the path after this guy. So, for example, you want to search, the path will be search. If you want to have like lookup, then you have the path is lookup or some other APIs that Apple have. So here I'm going to have a private var path, which is a string, and we're going to switch on ourselves, because here the nice thing about an enum is that we can switch on ourselves to examine whether we are this object, this instance of the enum right now is in which case. So for example, we can switch on ourselves like this, which is this enum, right? And if it is the case of such, like this, we can bind these values. Or in this case, we don't want to do that, then we just search for the case of such. And if it is the case of such, we will return /such, like that. Oops, this is such, right? S-E-R, right, such. See this? Now, what happens if later on you want to expand this class? You want to have like lookup, right? The case of lookup. Then when you build the app, Xcode will yell at you right here and it says that, hey, it is not exhaustive. It is not exhaustive because what? You still miss some other cases of this enum. You have to provide the path here. You see this? All right, so that is why we want to use an enum in this case. What else? Next up, now let's have some parameter keys for our URL because you remember that example URL. So let me have some example URL here. Example, which is our base URL like this, right? The base URL, and then we have the search, and then we have what? We have question mark term equals something over here, and entity equals something over there, right? So now what we want to do is we want to have those keys. These are the things, the search, the term, and the entity here is what we call a key, a parameter key. So now let's have a private struct called parameter keys. And here I'm going to have a static let country equals to country, static let term, term equals to term, static let entity equals to entity, like this. So for example, if after the entity, I want to search only in country equals to US, then we have country is US. Or you want UK, you can do UK. If you want to have like Japan, you can have Japan. See that? All right, and there are other keys you can check out on iTunes, that documentation. Next up, we should provide some default values because maybe the user doesn't want to search at a specific country. So let's say we want to have a private struct called default values here, and let's have a static let country. We default to be the US. Next up, let's have the static let the term. How about we want to have the term is like just by default, we want to have the term something like Apple. Okay, so by default, if they don't provide us the term, it could be Apple. You see that? Cool. All right. Now, what else? What else? Well, there could be we need after this thing, right? So let's construct a variable called parameters so that we can create a dictionary of key value pairs out of these terms and parameters that the user provides us. So here we go. Let's have a var parameters, which is a string to any, right? A dictionary like this. And we'll construct that text. For example, this parameter, it can be something like, how about term? We want to search for Iron Man, or let's say Instagram, right? And then we have the term, another key value pair, something like entity. Is the value is what? Is our software, right? About country is US. You see that? So that is what we want to construct here. So now let's switch on ourselves again. And here, if it is the case of search, we can bind these values. If you don't know about enum, what it means is that we can get the associated value. These are what we call associated value in enum. So we can use those values. So we have let term and let entity. Like this, right? If it is a case of such, then let's construct a parameters, which is a string to any equals to a dictionary. This is a dictionary, right? Which is what we want to do here. Oh, by the way, I have to comment this thing out. And then inside here, inside here, let's have like term and then some term. We have entity, some entity, and then country to be something. Cool. So here, let's have parameter keys, which is this guy, right? Parameter keys dot term to be our term. Oops, I'm sorry. This is colon term, and then we have parameter keys dot country to be a default values of country, and then parameter keys dot entity to be entity, like this. You see this? And yes, you can provide some other keys inside here too. So now after that, we just have to return parameters. Let's see what is this. No? All right. See that? Cool. Awesome. Now, what's next? What's next is from these parameters, let me mark this thing as private. From these parameters, we have to make that into URL encoded. Why is that? Well, let me show you this, okay? So for example, let's use iTunes.search. I'm sorry, apple.com. Oops. Let's use apple.com like this, okay? And then let's say I want to do iTunes.apple.com/search like that. And then we have what the term is, let's say Instagram in entity. Let me zoom in here for you to see this. Entity equals to software. You see that? Press enter. And you see that it downloads something over here, which is the URL, pretty much the URL that we test previously. So if I click on here, you see that there's a bunch of what we call JSON format, right? JSON data. But now, the problem is, here's the problem. If I do, again, iTunes.apple.com, I should copy paste this thing. Like that, /search, and then we have the term. Let's say in here, I want to search for Iron Man, right? So remember, we will have a search bar on top of our app. Let's say the user enter Iron Man, and that is the term. You see that user will just typing in Iron space man, a blank space, right? And then we have like, how about and the entity equals movies, like that, right? So look what happened if I press enter. Press enter here. Okay, so it's show us some data. But now, this is because what we just did is we typing in the URL inside Chrome. And because we typing in the URL in the browser, they automatically, it is a bad example of mine, because when we typing in Chrome like that, automatically they would turn that thing into a URL encoded string. So what happens is, if you do it like this, if you do it as the search here, the term, if you do it as Iron Man, so the browser, if you send this thing to the browser, if you enter that into the browser will turn that into an encoded string, encoded URL encoded string, which is that plus sign that you see later on, right? But now, the problem is you are in an iOS app, you are writing your networking code. So if you send this thing to the network processor, that if we test it now, it will not work because the server doesn't have any idea what that blank space is, right? So now what we have to do is we have to have another variable here, and I'm going to mark this thing as private var, and we have to turn these parameters into what we call query component. Query meaning just like the query of that, which is a search, right? And we turn that thing into the component of the URL, and that is URL query item. See this? And this is also a computed property. So now in here, var component, let's have a component, an array of components, which is URL query item, an empty array of URL query items. And then for each of the key value pair inside our parameters that we constructed above here, for each of the key value pair inside that parameters. Let the query item to be a URL query item with a name and value. The name here is key, the value is the value, right? Oh, by the way, this is any, so let's turn this thing into a string using string interpolation like that. Okay, so string on string. And then let's have component. Oops, did I make something wrong? Alright, so let's have component dot append our query item. And finally, we'll return the component. Okay, see this? So now, again, let me just recap this a little bit because it's very important for you to understand this. So if you look at the table above here, you don't have to open that. So you see that this thing, the term, the description is the URL encoded text string you want to search for. So if you just do like the Jack Johnson without the plus sign, and you instead of do with the plus sign here, the space bar, it will not work because that is not your encoded string. So instead of the space bar, the URL has kind of like an encoding mechanism, or like kind of like a rules that the space will be replaced by the plus sign. You see that? So the values here, you see that any URL encoded text string, note that URL encoded replaces spaces with the plus character, and all the characters except the following are encoded. All these things are unacceptable. You see this? So what this URL query item does, it will do it for us. We don't have to like search through the string of the term, find the space bar, or find these dashes or underscores or asterisks to replace those with plus with those encoded string. That is all. You see that? So this thing will gives us that term. All right. Now last thing is this network processing. You see this? Network processor, it requires us to have a URL request. So now, why don't we give it a URL request? And because we will need that, so let me put it above here, var request, which is a URL request, like this. And from this request, let's have var our component to be URL component with a string of base URL. Okay, so we'll start off the components with URL components. A string is base URL, and then let's have component.path. We'll append the path into our thing. So let's unwrap this thing. You see that? We don't have to use optional training here. And then let's have components dot query items, which is our terms and key value pairs, right? So equals to query components. And then finally, let's construct a URL out of these components. So let URL equals to components dot URL. Pretty cool, huh? And then let's unwrap this thing. And finally, let's return URL request with the URL of URL. You good? So that is the App Store endpoint, which will gives us very simple. Will gives us something like this. So let's you know what? Let's test this thing out. Okay. So application definition launching with options here. Let's how about let's like example equals to App Store endpoint, and we want to do the case of dot search, right? So the term here, let's do Instagram. Entity is software, like that. And then we want to do example dot request, and let's print out this example dot request, and let's print out the URL out of this request and see how it constructs our URL. Cool. So now let's run the app and see how it looks like. All right, so I just run the app, and you see this thing. You see that? The URL is optional, https://itunes.apple.com/search And then we have the entity, we have the software, the term, and the country is US. That's cool. Now, let's change the term here into something like Iron Man. And let's see how it changes things up, okay? So now let's run the app. I just run it. Okay. So here we go. So you see that search, software is the entity, and the term. Look at the term. We have the term here is iron percentage 20 man. What is that percentage 20? We want to have like just Iron Man, right? So here, let's go into our browser, Chrome here, and let's say URL encoded text string. And let's do it for the first time. We have the W3 score, right? And let's see. Okay, so here it says ASCII encoding reference. So here, your browser will encode the input according to the character set used in your page. It all means that those Iron Man thing you enter into the browser, it will turn into this encoding text. So here, the character, if it is a space, it will turn into percentage 20. That's why over here we have the percentage 20, right? If it is a question mark, we have percentage 21. Let's say you want to have like 1 and 0 and 9, those kind of things, it will turn into percentage 33. So for example, I'm in 3. Run the app once again, and let's see if it is could be like 3, then it will be percentage 33. So it will turn something like that. So let's see. Okay. And over here we have what? We have percentage 203. Okay, so it maybe there will be like some differences in different encoding. Let me see over here. Yeah, you see this? All right. So that is the reason why we want to use that query component. Is that instead of we having to loop through or run through an algorithm to implement that string parsing into this a bunch of percentage things like this, we'll have that URL query item do the work for us. You see that? So that is its convenience. At this stage in our app, in the model, now we have two classes, two objects that allows us to do its job, right? So the network processor that we have over here, it will take up a URL or URL request. It goes off to the internet and it returns us some JSON. You see that? And then in the last session, we just do App Store endpoint, which is a class that takes in a string, the term or the entity, and then it does something over here, right? We remember that components, the path, the base URL, and then the query components, those kind of things. And then it gives us that URL. Now this URL will serve us the purpose of what? Of go from the URL here, feed into that thing, goes off to the internet, returns back some data, which is in JSON format. That's pretty cool, huh? Now, what else do we need in order to make our app work? Well, we need some App Store client. This store client, what it does is that, for example, instead of in our model, there will be a view controller over here. Now, I apologize if this thing is a little shaky because I am just practicing now with my new small camera here. It's kind of like a vlog camera and I'm still practicing it. Okay, so bear with me. So we have the view controller. For example, a view controller that will search up things. The user enters some text, for example, Iron Man, and then it will it uses this App Store client, some term, some entity, Iron Man, movie. It will use an endpoint, right? It will have an instance of the App Store endpoint. It will construct the URL. After it gets URL, it feeds into another instance of the network processor. And then this network processor, what it does? It gives us some JSON, right? Now, the job of this App Store client, then it has to turn into an array of apps, which then will be returned back to our view controller. Pretty cool, huh? Now, because we want to have an array of apps. Now, because you see this? I cannot open it. Okay, here we go. Now, we have the term, the entity, which is simple. The user just have to enter that, we'll build that thing, right? We have the endpoint, we did this. We have the network processor, we did that. But we didn't have this apps. Well, it means that before we do this App Store client, we have to jump into the third object in our model, which is a class. So what does a class have? An app. What does an app has? Has the name, description, price, category, all of those things. And the most important thing is we need a constructor, an initializer that gives us the ability that will initialize an instance out of a dictionary. What is a dictionary? Which is a string to any, right? Now what is a string to any right here? Well, remember this thing, right? Do you remember this? The JSON? This JSON, when it fits over here, we can turn that immediately into this string any. It means that from the JSON that we parse into dictionary, we can turn into immediately an app. And from that, we can turn into an array of apps. So let's do that. Let's right click into our model over here. Right click and let's have a new file over there. And let's use a Swift file. Here I'm going to call this thing app. Create that. Cool. So here inside this, you can use a class, but here it's pretty simple class. So let's object. So let's use a struct called app over there. Like that. And here inside the struct app, let's have a var called, how about we need the name, right? So let's have a name, which is a string. Let's have the price, which is a double. Let's have some other things. How about the description, which is a double? I'm sorry. A description is a string. Let's have the price. Now the price here, we already have a double, but we want to turn that into a formatted price, meaning like $2, $1.99, something like that. So formatted price, which is a string. And we need some other things. For example, the edge of the app has a thumbnail, right? We call that an artwork of the app, which is the icon of the app. So let's have the artwork URL, which is the URL that will point us to the artwork thumbnail. Now, this URL, we use an optional URL because it can be nil, right? So maybe some errors with parsing this URL, who knows. Next up, let's have the iTunes URL. The iTunes URL, which is the URL to the iTunes store. The user clicks on that, it gives us the users the ability to go into the App Store. And then URL. You see this? Okay. All right. Next up, let's have the initializer for our dictionary, which is string, a dictionary of string to any, like that, right? Okay. Now how can we make sure that we can parse this correctly? So let's look at the working with iTunes site, and we have the search examples. So the search examples here, I think that okay. So here we go. It gives us a JSON response, some example response, something like this. And you see that, how about we have the key value pairs here. This is a dictionary of the app or the search result that we have over there, right? So we're going to have the kind, which is a song. We don't use that here, but you see the example, right? We have the key value pair. Now let's look for, how about I don't think that we have the name here, but we have something like we have like the artwork URL. You see that? And 60 meaning that 60 by 60 pixels. We have artwork URL 100, which is 100 by 100. We have the price. We have the some other things here. So you can check out by pasting. You know what? Let me paste this thing. Is this Iron? No, this is movie. Is this Instagram? Yeah. So I'm going to copy this thing into JSON formatter like this. Goes into this first result or any result that you have. Paste the entire thing here. Process that thing. Okay? And you don't have to do this actually. I'm going to show you here in just a moment. So let me expand this thing. Okay, increase the size of the text. Here we go. All right. So now this is the result that we get back from iTunes, right? So we have the result count is 50. We have the result is an array of other dictionaries. You see this? And if I explain that, we have some other key value pairs over here. So let's look at one example. We have something like artwork 60, which is the thumbnail of that thing, right? So for example, if I want to use this artwork 512 over here, so let's me copy this URL, paste that into a browser, something like that. Oops. Okay, paste that. Oops. Oh, I cannot paste that? That's weird. Let me copy and paste. Here we go. You see that? That is the image right here. Okay, so below here we have the artist view URL, we have the kindness software, we have things like, let me look, if you scroll down here, you have the screenshot URL, you can use that too if you want to do that. We have, let's see, we have things like description. Yeah, so let's find out the description. Okay, here we go. This is the description. We have the price. You see that? We have the name. Now the name here, it's called track name. That's why we have the Instagram over there, right? And then we have something like formatted price. So let's find out that formatted price. Where is it? Formatted price. Where is that? I think it is price. Oh, here we go. Formatted price. So here, in the case of 0, it turns into 3. You see that? Okay. So now, as a good programmer, you have to store those static string, that is what we call static string, or some other thing we call semantic, into a struct. So let's have private struct API keys like this, and we have static let name is what? Track name, right? Remember that? Now, why do you want to use a struct here? Because later on, if we want to have like dictionary at, if I have to paste or typing in track name over here, and that's okay, but later on, maybe in other method over here, I will have that thing and I have to use this thing over here. Cool? But now, what happens if I kind of like misspelled it the first time, or misspelled it the second time, or even worse, Apple just decided to turn that into just name? It means that I have to find out all of these other things and change it, right? So that is repeating yourself, and that is bad in programming. So now here, if I change it over here, I just have to use API keys dot name, and that will give us this track name string everywhere that we use it. And if Apple does decide or to change it, or if we do want to, if we make a mistake and we change it here, we can just change one place and every other places will be changed. You see that? Okay. So now, next, let's have the static let artwork URL, which is artwork URL. And here I will use the 512, which is good. Let's have static let description to be description, static let formatted price to be formatted price, and let's have price to be price. All right. Okay. So next up, what else do we have? Well, what else do we have? Well, inside this dictionary over here, let's use a guard let syntax here, because there's something like the name, the description, and the price. Those kind of things. We want to make sure that we must have those informations from the dictionary. Otherwise, this thing will return nil. And because it will return nil, right, then let's mark this initializer can be failable, which is question mark like this. And then let guard let name equals to dictionary at the API keys dot name, like that. And let me copy this guy because we are going to use that a lot. The name as a string. Let artwork URL string to be a dictionary at API key dot artwork URL as a string. Let
description to be dictionary at API keys dot description as a string. Then you see that, right? We have Xcode autocomplete. That's pretty good. What else? Let's have formatted price, which is dictionary at API keys dot formatted price as a string. Right? Let me make sure that you have the. I still feel like it's, yeah, 28 is fine, but I'm just afraid that it's still too small for you guys. So here we go. Okay. Next up, let's the price to be the dictionary at API keys dot price, and this thing is a double. So let's parse that as a double. Let me move that over there. You can select all these things, hold the command, and then the square bracket, the right square bracket, and it will move up like that. So this bracket over here, right? You see this? Oops, that thing, that key, this key over there. You can press that with the command, and it will like indent that, just like a tab. Okay, now over here, I should have an else here. So God let, if we do have all of these properties, all of these key value pairs, otherwise I'm going to return nil, because an app doesn't have these information, will not be correctly constructed. So it is nil. Otherwise, let's have self.name to be name, self.artwork, URL to be the URL with a string of artwork URL string, like that. Self.description to be the description, self.formatted price to be formatted price, and self.price to be price. I know I go a bit fast, but you can pause it. Or let me pause it a little bit so that you can follow along. Cool? Alright. So that, my friend, is the app class or struct. So it will give us these properties. What it does is that we have the dictionary, which is a kind of like the result that we get from some network or some data we get. Turn that into an instance of the app, which allows us to use this thing later on inside our view controller and in our views.
Now in our model, we have the network processor. We did the App Store endpoint and we got the app. Lastly, this is last thing, guys. This is the last class in our model, which is the App Store client. So here is how it works. Number one, it will get, here's number one, it gets the term and the entity from somewhere. Maybe it is a view controller, maybe it is another model class. Who knows? Who else this thing has to provide us the term and the entity, right? Number two, it will create a new endpoint instance. And this endpoint instance, it will give us that URL request, right? And number three, from that URL request, we are going to use the network processor. From that network processor, right, it will download some data. It gives us the JSON. In terms, now this JSON is what? A string to any, right? So this string to any, from this thing, we are going to turn that into an array of apps. See this? Now, there's one thing we have to note though. This string to any here is not a dictionary of an app, but rather the result that we get from all of the apps that we are searching for. So for example, let me find some space to write on. Over here. Okay, over here. Let me do this. Now, an app, this is an app dictionary. Okay, this is an app dictionary. It will be something like this, where the name is a string over there, right? We have like the price is a string over there, and then we have some other key value pairs like that, right? So that is an app. I know it's terrible, my handwriting, but then this string to any JSON that we get from the network processor over here, it is different. This thing is different. It could be like the result that we get from the thing, right? So here it has something like
result count, I will show you in just a moment, is this is a key guy, is like 50, right? Oh, actually it doesn't have the quotation mark. And they have something like, how about the results, which is another key. And this key is what? Guess what? It is an array of other dictionary. So inside this dictionary, guess what? Is name, is something over there. We have like the price, is something over there, right? So this guy over here is an app. So now our job then, step number 4, I know it's getting messy. Step number 4, step number 1, someone who gives us that term identity from maybe a function parameter, right? Number 2, we create an endpoint. Number 3, we create a network processor. Number 4, from the JSON that the network processor, we have to get access to this result. And then from this result, we have to enumerate to each of these app dictionary, turn that into an app. And then after that, we got an array of apps. You see that? That is why over 5 here, we get an array of apps. So let's do that in code.
Let's right click in our model and let's have a new file. This file, script file, and let's have this guy, let's name this guy as the App Store client. And save. Okay. So here, let's have a class, or you know what, let's create a struct. It's very simple. It has only one method. So struct App Store client, like this. And this thing has a function called something like fetch apps. And with the term is a string, in the entity is a string. See this? So it means that, for example, fetch apps with the term is Instagram, with term is Instagram in entity. Let me do that. Is entity is software. So fetch apps with term Instagram in entity software. Something like that, right? And then over here, now what does it return? Does it return an array of app immediately like this? Well, no. Why? Because yeah, it is networking code. It takes some time to download this stuff from the internet. That's why we must have a completion handler over here, and it can escaping out of this. So we mark that as escaping, and then the parameter of this closure is return void like this. But inside here we will have an array of app. Because it can be nil, let's make that optional in the implementation of the method. Cool. Okay, so let me recap this thing. Okay, here we go. Now, this fetch apps with a term and entity. That's clear. Is that clear? Okay. Now, this completion here will be a callback mechanism, kind of like a function because it is a closure. It will be called whenever inside here we done downloading stuff. So after we done downloading these stuff, we turn that into an array of apps. Then we call this thing. Now whoever is responsible for calling this fetch apps method will get this completion handler a chance to implement it. Okay? Alright, now inside this fetch apps, what is that? Step number one, remember that, is to create a search endpoint. So number 1, create a endpoint. Number 2, we need what? We need a network processor. Number 3, we turn or let's get the array of app dictionaries. Number 4, create an array of apps like that, right? And finally, number 5, we call the completion handler. So let's do number 1, the endpoint. So here, let's search
endpoint equals to App Store endpoint.search with a term. The term is our term. Entity is our entity, like this. And then number 2, let's have the network processor. So let's network processor to be network processor with the request. What is that request? Well, the request we can get from the search endpoint. So let's URL request, or let's search URL request to be search endpoint dot request. So here we can pass in this URL request, search URL request, like that, right? And next up, we need to call network processor dot what, download JSON, the method that we implement in the network processor. So we have a completion, press enter. In here we get the JSON, which is the return. So here let's make on JSON response, the HTTP response code. So HTTP response, and we got an error. We get the error over here, right? So inside this code is what we will do all of these 3, 4, and 5. Cool. All right. So now inside this, remember that this is now of the main thread. Of the main thread, right? So very much likely when we have an array of apps, we have to get back to the main thread. Remember the main thread? Main thread again in iOS is a multi-threading network environment, meaning that it has the main thread for animation. Any UI code is in the main thread. Other thread is for something that takes time to do. For example, downloading a bunch of apps, downloading a bunch of data from the internet. That is off the main thread. On the main thread, it must be UI code. And here, pretty much likely, we are going to do UI code so that we can show these apps, right? So what we need to do is now we need to get back to the main thread. The way that we do this is we call dispatch queue dot main, which is it gets us the main thread, dot async to synchronize to implement that code. So here, let JSON. Oh, by the way, let's put this thing inside here, right? Okay, so number 3, let's get an array of app dictionaries. Let JSON equals to the JSON response. We cast it as a string to any. Let me check. Do we need to cast it? I don't think that we need to cast it. Download JSON and JSON handler, and the JSON is already a string to any. Okay, cool. So now over here we actually don't need that. So here we just have JSON equals JSON, like that, right? We don't have to cast it because it's already an dictionary optional, an optional dictionary, right? Next, let's have let result dictionaries. Now, if you look at, oops, not here, but here, right? So this is that result that we are talking about. So this result over here, we have the result count is 50. And then we have this key is result, which is an array of result of apt dictionaries. So we have to access that equals to the JSON, which is this guy. We access the result key, right? And then here's pay attention. We cast it. Pay attention to this. Pay attention. This is very important and it is very error prone. We cast this thing as an array of string to any, an array of dictionaries. See this? This is a dictionary. This is an array of dictionaries. pay attention, because when I did this in my code, I made this mistake one or twice, so it is real painful debugging error. So please pay attention to this, okay? If you cast it as just as the dictionary like this, it will fail. Now, if it fails, it will not show anything because it is the guardlet here, right? So this is an array of dictionaries, because this really is an array of dictionaries, right? So pay attention to this. Cool? Okay. Otherwise, else, if we don't have anything here, if we don't have an array of dictionaries, and if this JSON response is nil, then very simple, we just have to call completion nil. Completion nil, and we will return here so that it will get out of this guardlet. Cool. So that is why we have this completion. The parameter is an optional array of apps. Okay. Now, if we do get the array of apps, an array of app dictionaries actually, if we do get that, then now it's step number 4. We need to create an array of apps. So here inside this, let apps to be, now there's several ways that we can do this. One way we can do is var apps to be an empty array of apps like this, and then for each of the app dictionary in the result dictionaries like this, right? We can let app to be apt at the dictionary is app dictionary, and then so when we call this app dictionary, we turn from the dictionary into an app instance. So now our job is to append that app into the array. Makes sense? It is yelling at us because this app is an optional, so let's ungrab that, or we can if let here. But this way is cool. It's kind of like tradition, we can do this, that's cool. But there's a better way to do that. It's kind of like was that a cheat way, right? A cheating way is that we can use a method called flat map. So let apps to be the result dictionaries dot flat map like that. Okay, now this it has a bunch of things here, but I want to use this thing. So here, press enter. So inside this, actually you don't need to use these things. Inside that over here, let me delete that thing. In here, we can do app dictionary inside the result dictionaries like that. Pretty much it is like we don't have to write the full-fledged for loop, right? So it's still app dictionary in the result dictionaries, and here we return an app from the dictionary of app dictionary like that, and then it will gives us all of these things here. You see this? It will give us an array of apps. Alright. Now the nice thing about this is I think that it will not, I believe it will not like append the nil case, maybe. Okay, so I have to check the documentation on that. But this thing we don't have to ungrab it here, which is pretty nice. Okay, now the last thing, we have to call in the completion because now we have an array of apps. So completion with the apps. Right? So that is that, my friend. Everything is done for the apps like this. Pretty cool, huh? That's pretty awesome. Step number 6. Let's design our app UI in main.storyboard. So now we have all of the app model, the networking processor, the App Store endpoint, the app.script, and App Store client all set up. Now let's go ahead and design our app UI in the storyboard. Here is an example of the app, very simple design for us to focus on using the client, for using the networking stack. So this is actually our complete project from the storyboard. So we have a simple image view, right? And then we have the label of the application name, and then some description and the price over here. So let's do this. Go ahead into your main.storyboard, and I'm going to delete that view controller, and then inside the view controller here, Oh, hold on. Okay, now at this stage, can I give you a little code challenge? Okay, so your code challenge this time is to design this UI in your storyboard, and then after that, can you just like make a screenshot or something and share the link in the description, in the comments for me, so that I can check that out. So I would say spend at least like 15 minutes or 20 minutes, try to do this and then share it with us, and then come back to me, check with me, and then we'll do it together so that we are on the same page. Okay, so do it now. Alright, did you do it? Here we go. This is your last chance, otherwise I'm going to do it, and if I do it and you follow along, maybe you will not get as many values as you do it by yourself. So did you do it? Okay, so I'm going to head over the TeleView controller, drag this thing out. Oh, you know what? We will need a navigation controller anyway, so we'll drag our navigation controller so that it will have us a free TeleView controller here. Make this navigation controller our initial view controller, and then inside your TeleView controller, let's change this thing into like App Store. Like that, and then let's focus in our cells over here. So let me drag this thing down like this. Cool. And we need an image, right? Let me make this like that so that we have some space here. Okay, so we need an image that is a UI image view. So image view, go here. Let's change the size into X position is 12, Y position, let's make that 16. The width I want to change to 64, and height is also a 64. Now let's change our content mode of this image into aspect fit so that it will be a fit icon. Cool. Okay, next up, let's have a label for our application name. So the label here, let's change this thing into application name like that. Awesome. Next up, let me use auto layout for these guys. Oh, you know what? Let's do that later. So I'm going to duplicate this guy, put it over here so that this thing is going to be something like application description goes here. It can possibly be very long, but we want it to stretch into 2 lines like that. Okay, so that this thing can be long, and maybe we want to do that in 2 lines. And how can we do that? So we'll select this guy, change the number of lines here into 2, and then we should be good to go. Let's make some space here like that, and then we'll put that over here, change the lines like this, right? Next up, let's have another label right beneath it. And how about here, we change that into $199, like this, 1.99. Cool? Okay, now let's change some of the text, some of the fonts. The application name is this kind of like the header of the cell. So the system is fine. I want, instead of the style here, instead of all these things, I want to change the font into headline like this. So it will be a little bit bold, and it will be changed according to what the user changes in accessibility. So now let's hold command equal button. Okay, and then I'm gonna move that using the blue guidelines. And this thing is kind of like the body of the text because it is a description. So let's change this into the body. Okay, let's make that so that it will be something like this. Oh, you know what? Let me put that up 0. Looks pretty good. Oh, 0. Okay, now the way that we have the ruler is I hold the option key, so I select the label, hold the option key, and then we hover these guys, and then we have the ruler, we have the distance between 2 elements. Awesome. Lastly, this label over here, it is kind of like the footer or the caption one. Yeah, let's change into, it can be the footnote or caption one. Let me change that. Yeah, caption one is good. So command equals again like this. Let's put that over here. Now I want this to be, let's change the distance into 0. 0 is maybe a little bit so too close. Let's change it into 4. Yeah, 4 is good. Looking good. Next up, let's have the distance below here. Let's change that to 16. So we have 13 here. We need to increase the height of the cells 3 more points. So 3 more points, like that, right? I think it's just 2. Yeah, we need 1 more point. So it will be 124 if you did it correctly. Okay, now let's apply auto layout on these guys. So I'm going to use the P menus, uncheck constraint to margin, 16 the top, left, width and height, add the constraint. This guy application name, like that, uncheck the constraint to margin, top, left, and bottom. Yep. Okay, this guy, let's do this guy. We want to have this, uncheck the constraint to margin, 0 to the top, we already have that, 8 to the left and right. And let's do 2 below there. So add the constraint like this, right? And then we have this guy. So this guy is, we want to have like just the 8 to the image, and then let's have, what is that? So let's uncheck the constraint to margin. 8 here, we want to have 8 to the image, right? So 8 to the image. 2, we already have the top. And then the right here, the trailing, we don't need to care about that. But the bottom, we want to make sure it is 16 and add the 2 constraint. Now, at this stage, you'll see these red lines over here, right? These red lines. Now, what this says is that, hey, these 3 things right here, they are fighting for space. What do I mean by that? Auto layout, as you know, auto layout, in order for you to tell auto layout how to lay out all of these elements properly, you need to give it 4 pieces of information for every single element. Number 1 is the X position, the Y position, the width of that element, and the height of the element. Now, this guy, we provide all of these informations, but there's one more. That is, auto layout in this case, even though later on we want to make this cell to be what we call dynamic table view cell height. But auto layout doesn't have any idea about that in the storyboard, because that will be implemented in our code. So inside this, the way that auto layout works is that it assumes that this cell only has this much space. So it says that, hey, I honestly don't know how to handle this case, because these 3 labels, what if this label has multiple lines like this, or has only 1 line, then at that time vertically like this, right, vertically, which one of these 3 labels should have more space? Which one should have less space? And that in auto layout is what we call priorities. So if you select the description like this, and when you scroll into your the ruler icon here, or the size inspector, and then below all of these constraints, you find the content hugging priority and the content compression resistance priority. Don't worry, if you don't know about these, here it is. The content hugging priority, it means that if you imagine this views right here, right, our label, this label that we are selecting right now, it has a box around it, which is the frame of the view, right? And then this frame, it has kind of like a rubber band surrounded it, wrap around it, or like a line wrap around it. And if we increase the content hugging priority vertically, if we increase this number into like 500 or 750 or 1000, the higher the number, that rubber band, it will hug more. It will hug more, meaning that when this thing doesn't have much space, this thing will not grow more. So the content hugging priority, it means that I don't want to grow more. Okay, so the higher the number, the content hugging priority means that I don't want to grow more vertically or horizontally. Now this in the opposite direction, the content compression resistance, it means that I don't want to be shrink down. So if the numbers is higher, it means that, hey, I don't want to shrink down, so shrink others down. So for example, all of these three labels and all of these elements, the default ones for the vertical and horizontal content hugging priority, again, content hugging priority mean that I don't want to grow more. Okay, the higher the number, it means that I don't want to grow more than other things. So in this case, if we want to have to shut down all of these errors in auto layout, honestly, is that we will want to make one of these labels, for example, this guy. Let's have the application name here. We make that into like 0 lines. It means that it can be multiple lines, right? So let's drag it to the right like this, and let's have the right constraint like that. Cool? And then now we want to grow it. So we will say that, hey, in case that I am too big, then shrink me, then allow me the space to grow. So it means that this content hugging priority, again, the content hugging priority means that I don't want to grow more. So if I increase this space, it will not be able to grow. It also means that if I decrease this, it will be able to grow. Right? All right. So you see that it changes immediately like that. But in fact here, I actually want this guy, this description here, to be 250 so that it just looks nice. Okay? And in our code, we are going to make sure that all of these things will be automatically, dynamically grows in size, so you don't have to worry about that. I know I took a lot of time to talk about the priority. It's just that it is a really confusing topic in auto layout. And when I first got started to learn auto layout, it's really confusing to me. The content hugging priority and the content compression resistance priority. It's just like rocket science. But all it means is that, again, let me repeat that because repetition is the mother of skills. Content hugging priority means that, what it means is that the higher the number, you don't want to grow more. The content compression resistance priority means that the higher the number, then you don't want to shrink down more. Cool? So just if you don't understand any of that, that's okay. Watch it once or twice again and everything will make sense. Cool? Okay, now, so that is how you design your app in the main.storyboard. Let's move on and create a custom cell for this app cell. So we have a tail view cell here. Let's move on and create that custom UI tail view cell. So let's right click over here, new file, and go touch class. This is a UI table view cell subclass, and let's name this guy app table view cell. Next, and let's leave it over here, create. Inside this cell, let's delete all of this code because we will do that from the storyboard. And then I'm going to click into main.storyboard, change the custom class of this cell into our app tail view cell like that. And then what you want to do is open up the assistant editor, and one fast way to do this is hold the option key, click into the app tail view cell because that is the class that we want to do, and you will see that it pops up immediately. Pretty cool, right? Okay, presentation large. Okay, now inside here, let's have some IB outlets connected into this guy. So I'm going to right click and drag from the image over here, and let's name this guy artwork image view. Oh my god, is it a view? Let me alright, so I just make a mistake, so let me redo this. Okay, redo it once again. Okay, so I just do Command Z twice. Now, just to make sure that we don't have any wrong outlets connected, Otherwise, it will crash our app later on if we don't have it in our code here. So what you have to do is in the contents view here, if it is still artwork image view, then you have to right click here and disconnect this outlet over here. Cool? Okay, now let's select this image view. Make sure it is the image view and change this into artwork image view. Like that. Connect this, and this guy, let's change that into our title or app name label. This guy, the description, the app description label, and finally the price over here. So price label. Pretty cool, huh? All right, so that is our app table view cell. What else do we need? Let's talk about this cell first. So what else do we need over here? What is the public API for this cell? Well, because we are trying to display a cell, that means that we need an app, right? So let's have an app. And whenever this app gets set, let's call self.updateUI. And inside this self.updateUI, I'm going to have a func updateUI like this. Okay, so inside this, let's change our own of these properties. Number one, let's change the app name label .text into the app.name. Let's do the app description label .text. Oh, hey, by the way, let's pause here and let's do a little code challenge. Are you in? Okay, so here we go. I want you to change the app description label and the price label into the app here. And pay attention that the app here, okay, if the price, the description should be straightforward for you, but the price label, if it is 0, then make sure it is free. If it is, if the price here is a number, then use the number. Cool? All right. And then leave the artwork image view. We'll talk about that in the next session, in just the next step, which we'll need to do some network call. All of those things we'll talk about in the next one. But here, let's just do the description and the price label. Do it now. All right, then it's my turn. App description label .text to be the app.description. And finally, I want to check if the app.price to be 0. Right? If the app.price is 0, then let's change the price label .text to be our app.formatted price, because this thing, it can be free, it can be something that iTunes just give us. And then let's do the else here, price label .text to be the app.price like that. And because it is a double, we need string interpolation right here. Like that. And let's have the $sign again here. You can use what is that? If you are in different country than the United States, then what you have to do is you have to localize these strings. You have to localize these currencies. So that is out of the scope of this training. So just keep in mind that if you are in a production code for some apps like e-commerce app or store app or anything that related to monies or related to strings, pay attention to that. Cool? Okay, so that's step number 7. You create the custom cell. Again, we still have the art image view, but we will talk about in just a moment. Let's move on and create a class for this controller, for our table view controller right here. So right click in new file. And let's use this guy as a CocoaTouch class, and because it's a subclass of UI table view controller, let's name this guy App Store table view controller. And name is kind of long, but it is descriptive. Here we go. Now, when we have the chance, let's factor out these into like different groups. This is the controller, so let's have that as the controller. And then all of these things, the cell, the storyboards, let's make sure those are in a group called the views. Right, these are the views. This is the model, the controller, MVC. Remember that? Cool. So now inside the main.storyboard, let's change this guy, the custom class, into the App Store tail view controller. And before we forget, let's change the identifier for this cell too into app cell, like this, right? The app cell. Cool. All right, let's talk about the app tail view controller. Let's do some cleaning first. I'm going to change the view did load here, delete that. And then the did receive memory warning. We don't need this thing, honestly. And then number of sections, number of rows in sections. We need the self row index path. All of the other thing below that, let's delete these guys. Okay, so now let's talk about the app tail view controller. What do we need? When we talk about new file, when we talk about new class, very much likely the first thing we should consider before we go implement that thing is what is its public API, meaning what is its input, what is output, all of those things, right? So the public API of this thing, we are trying to display a table of apps. So we should have our apps is an array of apps. And because it can be nil, I'm going to make this thing optional, right? Cool. Next thing, inside inside the tail view, we have some identifiers. Later on, maybe we want to have some segue identifier to segue into another view controller. Then, as a developer, let's make sure we are doing good practice here. Inside here, I'm going to create a struct called storyboard inside the class. This will allow us to store some of the identifiers. Very cool way like this. So let's have static let app cell to be our app cell, which is the identifier of the cells that we used earlier, right? Then this guy, for example, if I want to use that app cell identifier, we can just use storyboard dot app cell like this, and you have number one Xcode completion, and number two, later on maybe you have like this thing change, and you use this thing in a lot of places. Then if you want to change here, you just have to change in this storyboard, and all of the places will be changed dynamically. That is cool, right? Okay, now let's implement our tail view controller. Oh hey, before we do that, let's download some of the apps first. And after we got some app, then we'll display those into the tail view controller. But hold on. How can we download the apps? How can we download these apps? How can we download these apps? Well, how can we download these apps? That is an interesting question. But what are like the hour went by? What did the hour go by? What have we been doing in this course so far? What have we been doing in this course so far? Yeah, we focus all of our times in creating the network processor. We have the App Store endpoint, gives us all a bunch of endpoints. We have the app.swift having the app class, and we have the App Store client that has, we have the method fetch apps. That will gives us the completion handler here, an array of apps. So let's use that. Inside the App Store tail view controller, I'm going to have another var App Store client. Let's initialize that immediately. Apps equals App Store client like this, right? All right, and then in the view that load, let's use App Store client. Oh, you know what? Let me call a method called fetch apps, like that. And later on, maybe you want to reuse this thing in other cases. So here, func fetch apps, like this. And then inside this, let's use App Store client. App Store client dot fetch apps, like this. And then with the term in entity, and then the completion. Now we don't have the search bar here, so let me make a to-do here so that we can create a search controller in this tail view controller, so that we have the search term and the in entity. So by default, let me just have the with term here into Instagram, and then the entity, let me make that software like that, and the completion, let's press enter so that we have this guy, and this guy we have an array of apps, right? And in here, this closure here, the closure here will get called after a while, after it gets downloading sometimes, right? So after here, let's call self.apps equals to apps. Now the apps here is this guy. The self.apps is this guy. So that we assign all of these apps into this app. Cool? All right. Now let's test this thing out. Let's run the project and let's me print out the self.apps over here. Okay, and see how it looks like if we have some data in the console. Here we go. Moment of truth. Oh, where's my simulator? Here we go. This is the simulator. So it's going on. And boom. Pretty cool, huh? We have a bunch of data. It is optional over here because the apps here is optional. That's pretty good. Now maybe I just have a feeling that I haven't shown you exactly what happens with networking calls like this. Like what is the order of this closure and this completion handler. So let me print out number 1 over here. So when this guy gets called, this will get number 1. Okay, it will get called immediately, and then after that, okay, it will not execute the code here immediately. Rather, it will get out of this. Rather, it goes into this fetch apps, and then it will execute this guy. So print 2. You see this? So number 1, it goes here, and then it goes here into the fetch apps. It executes all of these things like that, right? And then, so let me recap. Okay, I just afraid that if I talk too fast, then this thing is so important. So for you to understand. So number 1, when we call the fetch apps, it will execute this line, and then it goes in here, and it doesn't execute this thing yet, but it will rather execute the fetch apps. So click over here, okay, and then, oh, you know what? This thing, it could be like really tedious. So let me make a breakpoint over here so that you see it will pause the execution of the code. And then let's make a breakpoint over line 31, which is this line. And then after that, let's make a breakpoint in line 32, like this. And let's go into the fetch apps, and we will make a breakpoint in line 15. Cool? The next thing we'll do is this download JSON. Remember, we have the network processor, right? So now let's make a breakpoint in line number 22, which is the call of the download JSON. The next thing I want to do is let's make a breakpoint inside this closure. This closure over here, meaning that after we download the data and after some time, it will get called back. So let's make a breakpoint over here. So that if, okay, here is the logic. If this thing gets executed linearly, so if this thing will get called, this thing will get called, and this thing will get called immediately. But the fact is, it will not get called immediately. Rather, it will get outside of this method. Oops, outside of this method is this line over here, right? So we'll make another one over here. So let's run the app and see how all of these things get executed. The process of networking call like this. Really important for you to understand this, so that later on maybe you want to debug this or you build it on your own and you will understand this guy. Okay, so it will pause the app right now. It is not crashing, it is our breakpoint. So number 1 is goes here. Let's go and click this button. This thing is step over, meaning it will go to the next line and keep executing. Okay, so it prints 1, goes in here, we pause that, step over, and actually let me pause it. We should step into this fetch apps because it is a method. So let's go run it once again. Bear with me here because this thing I do it on the fly, and I hope that you understand this. Okay, So we are in here, line number 3, right? You see this? It says thread 1, breakpoint 1.1. And then now, let's step over this to this next one. And we are here at the verge of calling the fetch apt. We are about to call the fetch apt. So now, let's jump into the fetch apt to see its implementation. Click over here, and okay, it shows us this guy, right? Let's jump into that. And okay, so now it goes outside. Let me do it. Okay, I jump in the next one. You see this? So I jump into this guy. Let's click next. It goes to this line, create the search URL request, and then it create the network processor. It create this guy. Now, if I click the step over, meaning the next execution, can you guess, will it go here or will it go here? Yeah, because it will go outside of this, because at this time it will not download this yet, right? So this thing will not get called yet. Well, maybe it will, because the network may be fast, but it will very much likely not. So click here, and yeah, see that? So we have a bunch of code here, and when I type this guy, it doesn't execute the next one. It means that this thing will get called later. So click over here, jump next, and it goes outside here. It doesn't. See this? Before we are now in this fetch apt, before we are in this fetch apt, I step into that, and then I implement, we go into each line of the fetch apt. But then after we're done with the fetch apt, it doesn't execute this closure immediately, because it is not the time to do that yet. So then it goes into this line, and we exit out of the fetch apt. So let's do that. Right, step over, and we go into view the load. Now I will click into this button so that we continue the program execution, and here we go. It doesn't continue the program. It pauses over here. It pauses over this patch queue.main.async, and guess where it is? App Store client. Now after a while, in this case the network is pretty strong, so it will be like a few milliseconds, right? Then this closure will get called back, because the data is now available in this JSON response, the HTTP response, and the error. See that? So this thing is a callback mechanism that allows us to get executed when the data is available. So now let's move on here, and it goes over there, and move on there. Oh, you know what? Let me continue with the program, and it will get called again. That's okay, because some data will do that. Okay, now then after that, you see this? After that, we'll call the completion, right? Over here, the completion apps, and then it will get called over here. So at that time, inside this, because we call the completions, it will jump into this completion. And the completion in this case, because we are calling it from the table view controller, is this function. This whole function over here is what we call a closure. Pretty much it is a function that you can pass around. Then this closure will get executed. Just imagine that this whole closure is this completion, and the apps here is the data that you pass into this. Make sense? Okay, now if you don't understand all this, please do yourself a favor to rewatch the last 5 or 10 minutes that I just walked through all of these things with you, because it's really important. And once you understand all these things, it will be like bang, really easy for you to understand all of these networking call. The foundation of that pretty much is just understanding what I just show you through, and I hope that you enjoyed it. I of course enjoyed it so much. Okay, so now let's continue these, and you see we have a bunch of data. That's pretty cool. So now let me actually delete all of these. Oh, you know what? I have to. It doesn't. Guys, away. Because my little puppy, when he hears that sound, when I like delete a breakpoint like that, you hear that sound, he will get crazy. Like he will he will bark and it will absolutely ruin the whole video. Okay, so let me find a apps client. Let's delete all of these breakpoints. Okay, now we have the data. Let's move on and implement the data UI table view data source. So inside the number of sections, oh, you know what? Let's do a code challenge, because I think this is the time that you can do it now without my help. So let's implement the number of sections, table view number of rows in section, and self row index path. I give you 5 minutes. Go. All right, now it is 5 minutes virtually already, so I will not wait for you to do it anymore. It is my turn. Number of sections 1. The number of rows in section. What should we do? Yeah, here we'll check if the apps. Okay, if the apps here. Oh, you know what? If let apps to be apps, then we'll return the apps.count. Meaning that if we do get some data, we do get some apps, then we return the count. Otherwise, I'm going to return 0. Cool? Self row index path. This thing will be easy. So this cell here, the identifier. Hey, if you don't know this stuff, then please be patient with the learning journey. I know, because after training more than 1 million developers now, I just see the pattern that a lot of guys just like, I want to create something exciting that connect to web servers and backend and do a bunch of sharing, a bunch of animation and stuff, and I want to skip the foundation. Well, it doesn't happen that way. So please, if you don't know about table view, check out the course table view that you have. Okay, so here, the identifier here. Let's change that to storyboard.app cell, and I will cast that down as a app table view cell. And then we need to configure the cell. So cell.app to be the apps at index path.row, and we use optional chaining here so it can be nil. And then you know what? I don't want it to have the selection style, so let me just leave it there. Cool. So now, let's run the app and see how it looks like. Here we go, moment of truth. This is kind of like the most exciting part of the whole thing. So, here we go. Why don't we have some data? We have a whole bunch of data printed out here, but why doesn't it show on the table view? Well, this is one of the things that you need to really pay attention, and I think a lot of you have, is after we get the data here, we fetch the apps, we assign the apps to apps here. The table view doesn't have any idea that you get some new data. So now here, let's use self.tableview.reload data and run it once again. And this time it will very much likely to have some data. Here we go. You see that? Pretty nice, huh? Not bad for the first try. So you see all of these things. It is squeezed down, right? Like this thing has only one line. We want to have 2 lines. This thing doesn't even show. Why is that? Well, that is the problem with auto layout. Now we will not fix auto layout because we want to tell auto layout that, hey, I want to use dynamic table view height here. So the way that you do that is in your view load. Let's call table view dot table view dot row height to be UI table view automatic dimension. This will says to table view that, hey, table view, listen to me. Table view, knock knock. I want you to dynamically resize the row height, so that all my contents will be laid out according to what I tell auto layout. So this is what this line does. But then table view will tell us that, hey, I know, but you need to give me like some help, because I cannot do that on my own. So the way you do that is you tell that, hey, table view, okay, I know you need some help. Let me help you by give you an estimated row height. And the way that the estimated row height, let me give you from the row height. Now, before you set this guy, when you call teleprompter height here, the storyboard will set it. So this teleprompter height at this line here will be the height of the cell 124. You remember that in the storyboard. So we have some numbers here. You can actually put directly 124 here, and that's fine. Cool. Let's run the app once again and see how it looks like. Here we go. Boom. We have beautiful. Really beautiful. We have the Instagram. We have, this is 2 lines. This can be 2 lines over here. The text, you see that. And then we have all these things. This 2 lines. This is 3 lines. And this still 2 lines. That's pretty awesome. Now, I will guess that very much likely a lot of you will have some problem with auto layout. That is absolutely, and that's cool. So if you have any problem with auto layout and you see that your cell squeezed in, or all of the elements just like goes around, doesn't look cool as much as this, then what I would recommend you do is download the complete project below this video. In the description, you have access to the complete project. Okay, so download it there and check all of the constraints in the main storyboard. Check these, click to the cell, goes into the size inspector, and then click each of these guys. Check all of these constraints, check the content hugging priority and content compression resistance priority. And then after, if you see some changes, ask yourself, why is it that I did it like that, not like this or some way other? Cool. All right, so that is that. Now, you see that when we click over here, we can still click over here. I don't want that to happen, so let me, and okay, and also this separator, let me change that separator. Have some inset. So I want to have the inset of 84 to the left and 8 to the right. So let's select the cell, go here, and then we have the separator. Let's have custom inset. Left is the 4, right is 8. Press enter. Run the app once again. All right, pretty cool. So we have these things, the separator. You see that? I don't know if you can see that. It will be layout very cool like this. Awesome. Next up, let's change one thing real fast. Is not the image, we'll change the image in just a moment. You see that we can select this guy and then gray out. I don't want to have that ugly gray out. So inside your cell for row at index path, we can do cell.selection style to be .none. Now this means that we can still select the cell. We can still select the cell, and every time we select the cell, the tail view that select row at index path still gets called. But what this does is that it will change the color of the selection. So here you can have something like gray or blue or default. I want it to be none, so no color for me, please. Right? So let's run the app once again and see what it looks like. Alright, so when we click here, we cannot click it anymore. That looks great. Last thing, step number 9, let's download these app images into the cell. So how can we do that? Well, let's look at the app API that we have, the app.swift, right? We have the artwork URL. So it means that this is the URL that shows us to the app. So can we download this? Can we download the image? Well, downloading stuff will pretty much is the job of the network processor, right? The network processor, remember that? And the network processor right now, it only has a method called download JSON. So it will download the JSON data for us. But what we want to have in the image is not JSON data, but rather raw data. So how can we have that? Well, if you recall, all of these things, whether it is download the JSON, any of that, is still, for downloading the JSON, we still need to download the data, right? That's why we have the data task and we have the data over here. You see that? And then we check all of the response. We have all of these data, and then we switch on the cases, all of those stuff. Well, the only difference is that we will not turn that data into JSON format, and that's it. So let me copy this whole thing, this whole $JSON thing, and then paste that below here. Okay, paste that below here. Paste that below here. So we have another thing, but instead of $JSON, let me turn to download data. Right? And then instead of JSON handler, let me turn that into data handler. And then above here, let's have another type alias. So type alias and data handler equals to data HTTP URL response and error like this that will return void. This is a, what is that? Pop quiz. It is a closure. Right, that is a closure. The data handler is a closure. So let's change this. Data here and data task, that's good. Of the main queue, that's good. HTTP response, we have the response as a HTTP URL response. Else we construct the error. That's awesome. If the data is nil, we also check the error and then we call the completion. Now, if the case is 200, we will not turn this into a closure. Into JSON object. So rather, let's delete all of these things. And our only job is to do completion with data, response, and error. So data, response, and error is nil because we don't have the error, right? So we have the response, HTTP response. You see that? Yeah, that's pretty much it. I think we changed like 1, 2, 3. And we have the method for us to download any kind of data. And this thing, it applies for you when you download image. It applies when you download videos off the internet. It applies when you download text or any kind of things. Okay, so now let's go into where should we use this. We should use this where we need it. Here in the app tail view cell. In the app tail view cell, let's have the network processor below here. So network processor below here. So number one, let's check if the URL equals to the app.artwork URL. If we do get this URL, then let's go ahead and download it. So let's construct the request to be a URL request with the URL of URL. Right? Why do we need a request? That's a good question. Because let's create a network processor, and that is network processor like this. And this network processor requires us to pass in a URL request. Remember that? Goes into the network processor. Its initializer or the constructor is a request, URL request. Right? So the request here, URL request, let's change that into URL request. Okay, now here let's do network processor below here dot download data, not JSON. Press enter for the completion and we get some data. We get the response, we get the error, right? So in here, okay, so in here, what should we do? Well, we should check on the data to see if it works. So now the data here and the image that we are going to turn into the artwork image view, what is the type of the code? Well, I know this question is really like ambiguous. What it means is that those things, if we change the data here, we put the data of the image into the image view. The image view belongs to UI. So it means that that is UI code. And guess what? When we are here, we are off the main queue. We are off the main queue. Multiple exclamation mark over there. Okay, so now our job is we need to get back on the main queue. How can we do that? Grand Central Dispatch. So we just do dispatch queue. Oops, dispatch queue dot main dot async like this. Okay, and then inside here we have the closure for us to implement. So now inside this, let image data to be the data. And then after we get the image data, now we get the image data. All we have to do is do self.artwork image view.image, and we can use UI image, the initializer data like this, and we just have to pass in the image data. Right? Cool. Okay, now let's run the app and see how it looks like. Hopefully we got some image. Here we go. What is this? We don't have to see any image. Now, if you look at the console over here, you see this line over there. Okay, this line over there, I know it's kind of hard to point out because we have a bunch of logs over here. But look at this. It says App Store Duc Tran, that's called the name of our app. And we have Apps Transport Security has blocked a clear text HTTP, all of these things. Well, what is that? Well, this thing, if you paste this thing into your Google or Chrome or Google, you'll find out that what happens is in iOS, there's a thing called App Transport Security. Only means it's kind of like a firewall that requires developer, whenever you want to make a network call, it has to be secured server. A secured server in HTTP protocol, it means that it has to be HTTPS. Well, what is that? Well, if you want to read about that, then goes on Wikipedia. I will link something below here for you to read that. It will be really, really beneficial for you. So what we have to do now is really simple. Just go into the app over here, and then inside the info, we will create a new key value pairs for the property list over here. So click over here. Click over the plus sign, and we'll change here into App Transport Security setting. You see this? Click, go outside, and it will change into a dictionary. Expand this guy. Click the plus button, and it will say as the first key, allow arbitrary load. It means that do you want to load from any kind of web server? Yeah, I want to have HTTP, I want to have HTTPS. Well, that we have to take care of. So change no into yes. Oh, I'm curious. Can I do like 1? Yeah, I will change into yes. Can I do 2? Yeah, it turned into yes. That's pretty smart because it is a boolean, right? A boolean. All right, so now run the app once again, and hopefully this time we get some images. Here we go. Let's build the app, and boom, yay, we have a bunch of images. So now what happens right now is my network at this time is really strong. That's why you don't see the effect. But if your network is a little bit slower, then you will start to see the effect that is like the cells will be dequeued, right? The tail view will dequeue the cells. That's why these images will stay the same. And then it takes some time to download the image. And so you'll see the effect something like still the same image here is also here. And then like 1 second later, it will turn into this ugly ash icon. Okay, I'm sorry if you are watching the equator of that. Okay, so what you have to do is one way to do that very simple is we can do self.image artwork image view.image over here to be nil. So before we even download the image, we clear out the old one. Right, so let's build the app once again and see how it looks like. Here we go. Now nothing really changes dramatically in my end because this image is pretty small. Some icons 512 by 512, so it should be just like a few kilobytes. So it doesn't make any dramatic changes, but if it is big image, then you will find out that it will really make a difference. All right, so the last thing let's do is this icon. It should be rounded, right? And the same for like this icon. So let's change it. The self.artwork image view.layer corner radius, which is like the radius of the corner here. Do you want it to be rounded? Yeah, let's do that 10. And then self.artwork image view.layer mask to bounds to be true, so that it will create kind of like a border around this, is what we call a mask, and then this mask will contain this image. And if we say that mask to bounds to be true, then it will cut out all the outside of that mask. Cool? So now let's run the app and see how it looks like. Alright, here we go. We have this thing rounded, and we have, well, this thing is rounded already. This thing is rounded. Beautiful. Incredible.
Alright my friend, I hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you do, can you do me 2 favors? Number 1, can you subscribe to this channel so that I can continue to deliver free trainings, video tutorials every single week for you on this channel. And number 2, what I would love to do for you, I would love to give you, is my new training called How to Create Nike E-commerce Retail Store App without having to lose $50,000 in the way. So I would love to give you that training for free. If you would love to do that, just click the link on this page, go there, leave your name and email there on this page so that I can happily send you that resource, that training all for free. Until then, my friend, go out there every single day of your life, learn new things, craft your ideas, and contribute to the world.